This recording is for geography slides 22 through 24. This particular recording is going to focus on slides 23 and 24, where we will be using the article to write out our examples. So we're going to skip ahead to slide 23 here. So on slide 23, it says, directions provide 3 specific examples of how Asia's geography influenced the development of people and culture in China. First, cite a direct quote from the article that contains evidence of a geographic feature impacting China. Limit yourself to one quoted sentence. Then, explain in your own words how this feature has affected China's history, people, and/or development. Use complete sentences and proper grammar. So on this first slide, the very first thing we need to do is we're going to have to cite a quote from our article titled How Geography Mapped China. If you don't already have that article open in a separate tab, go ahead and pause the video and make sure you do that now. Make sure your article is also completely annotated. So you should have words bolded that you didn't know, you should have examples already highlighted, and your summary written at the bottom, summarizing the main idea of the article. So first, we need to cite a quote. Now, in order to cite the quote, we need to make sure that we list and cite the article that it came from. So we can do this by saying, according to the article, How Geography Mapped China, it states. So always, we need to make sure that we are citing. That means identifying the article that this came from before typing out our direct quote. Once you're ready, we're going to go back to our article. Now, if you annotated in class or you annotated with a video, you should have a couple examples already highlighted that we did together. I'm going to use this first one for our first example. The eastern regions are fertile plains that have been built up by China's great river systems. This area has been settled and farmed for thousands of years. It is where all of the great dynasties and their capitals were located. Now, our directions say that we need to limit ourselves to one sentence, so that way we're not just throwing a whole bunch of quote in there. So I'm going to use just this first sentence here. The eastern regions are fertile plains that have been built up by China's great river systems. So I'm going to type that out. Make sure you end with a quotation mark. And that's all you need to do there for that first part, citing the quote. According to the article, How Geography Mapped China, it states, the eastern regions are fertile plains that have been built up by China's great river systems. Next, we need to write in our own words the effect that this had on China's history, people, and development. Now, we should be using complete sentences here and explaining it all in our own words. So we can start out by saying, this had an effect on China because. So we're going to start out there. This had an effect on China because. So first, we need to think a little bit about what it means to have fertile plains. If you need to, you can go back into the article, but I encourage you to try not to and just think it through in your own mind first. That's going to prevent you from plagiarizing. That's going to make sure that you're using it in your own words. So remember, fertile means that the soil is very rich in nutrients. It is that way because of all the river systems. Our article mentions that there have been lots of people who have lived there for thousands of years, and there have been lots of people who have been really successful farming there for thousands of years. So what you need to do in your own writing is explain in your own words how those fertile plains, how the rich soil is helping farmers. So why would people want to farm there? You also might want to talk about how if that area is really good for farming, there's going to be lots of food available. If there's a lot of food available, then you're going to be able to get some pretty big cities that are going to develop there throughout history. So some things you might want to talk about, and I'm going to put these in brackets so that way you can think about them and formulate your own sentences. Again, you might want to think about the fertile plains or the fertile soil and how or why that would be good for farmers. So you might want to explain that. You also might want to explain if it's good for farmers, what does that mean? What are they able to do? You also might want to explain if farmers are successful, what might that mean for big cities? Those are the types of things that you need to be thinking about as you're writing your own explanation here. Walk your reader through the fertile soil, how or why is that good for farmers? With good soil, what can farmers do? Is that going to produce a lot of food or a little food? If farmers are successful with this good soil, what is that going to mean for cities and people? Are they going to have enough food? Is that going to explain why you had so many cities in that area for a lot of China's history because of that good soil? Take a few minutes here and finish off your own explanation. Pause the video if you need to. We're going to move on to the next example. For our next example, before we get started, we need to cite the quote again, same as we did in the last example. According to the article, How Geography Mapped China, it states. And then our next example is talking about in the north there are extensive grasslands, and these were the home of the cattle-raising nomadic people. So I'm going to use the example of the extensive grasslands. Again, we are trying to cite examples of geographic features, and then in our explanation, we're going to talk about how they affected people. So I'm going to use the sentence, in the north are extensive grasslands. Once you've typed that out, we need to think about how did that affect China's history, people, and development. So we can start out our sentence by saying, this affected China because. So some things that you might want to think about, and again, I'm going to put these in brackets so that way you make sure you're writing it in your own words and not mine. We need to think about, what were the grasslands used for? Okay, what type of animals were being farmed or raised on those grasslands? So what were the grasslands used for? We also might want to think about why that area was used for that type of animal. Okay, so grazing animals in particular, they're not going to do very well in a mountainous area. So you can talk about why a grassland would be good for this type of animal. Or maybe why this type of animal would not have done well somewhere else. So why another area would not have been as good as the grassland. You need to walk your reader through what the grasslands were used for, why people chose the grasslands for that. Now, if you remember, the articles talked about cattle. Okay, so think about how cattle like to feed. Think about what areas tend to be used in order to raise cattle. Once you have all of that written down, that's your explanation. Now for our third example, all I'm going to do is get you started. Remember, in order to cite, you need to say, according to the article, How Geography Mapped China, it states, and you need to type your quote. Again, choose a quote with a geographic feature. Okay, make sure it talks about a geographic feature. And then at the bottom part of that box, you need to explain this affected China because. How did it affect the people? How did it affect China's history? Or why did something develop there as a result of that geographic feature? Once you've written all that out, you can proofread all of your examples, make sure you followed all directions, and you're good to go on slides 23 and 24.